This morning, we're continuing our segment, Monitoring Men's Health. May happens to be Mental Health Awareness Month, so this morning, we're getting a perspective from a faith leader.
Yeah, joining us in studio is Pastor David Hawkins from Living the Word Church in Collinsville, Illinois. Good morning, Pastor.
Good morning.
Thanks for being with us here this morning.
Glad to be here.
Yeah, so the big question here is, as a pastor, how do you approach dealing with mental health?
Well, for a long time, there was always a dichotomy between spirituality and therapy. So we tend to take a more progressive approach. We both encourage people to pray. We encourage people to engage in community, but we also collaborate with mental health professionals.
Now, the CDC says that 1 in 5 people will experience mental health issues sometime in their lifetime. Have you seen an increase recently because of COVID?
Absolutely. I think we're still dealing with some of the nuance of the pandemic, particularly anxiety. People fearful of what the future is going to look like, as well as trying to really reset and recenter based on such a disruption.
Yeah. How do you find that people cope with it in the church?
Well, you know, we're a spiritual church, so we do believe in prayer. We do believe in what we call the basic principles of our faith, which is meditation, prayer, reading of scripture. But we also encourage people to get into community, because I found out that human interaction is a very powerful tool to mental health. But I also am very involved in my physicality. So I work out every day. You know, I'm riding a bike, I'm doing 100 miles a week, I'm in the gym, and those are things that I try to convey to the church in many ways, and I give them on-ramps. And so last year, we actually invited various members who wanted a gym membership. We paid for a gym membership.
Oh, wow.
We said, hey, we want you to be a part of the holistic approach to your mental health, because there is warfare. You know, we do believe there is warfare. There is something that is opposing our progress, but we also know there's strategy. And part of that strategy is, hey, we're glad you're here, but we also want you to have a Monday through Saturday focus as well.
Yeah. You know, one of the things about dealing with stress, especially for men, is that we have a tendency to get into alcohol and things like that, which could then affect our mental health as well. How do you steer people clear from the evils of life?
Yeah, so I think one of the big things is you show them a positive example. You talk about longevity, you talk about legacy, but you give them healthy outlets. Oftentimes we go to those things that are unhealthy because that's all we know. But until we can show you a different path, we can't really hold you accountable to walking that different path. So our church tends to focus on not just Sunday attendance, not just, hey, you know, you're here, but it's about how can you live this out in everyday life.
Like the name of the church, Living the Word.
Yes.
Yeah, you're living it out.
Absolutely.
Talk about specifically with men. You know, as a young man in the church, you know, we went to, you know, Sunday school, you go to church, maybe have a revival, but there's not a lot of engagement, I feel like, when it comes to men. Women will get around church, men would just kind of sit back and hold it in. And sometimes that's not healthy. How do you get men to open up?
Well, one, that's the nature of men across the board. But I think the pandemic really made it clear that to be a silent sufferer is not healthy. And so now we're seeing men a lot more vocal about their mental wealth as well as their mental health. And so they're asking for help now. And so we're seeing them ask us for resources.
Well, and doesn't that relationship with you helping the men help the relationship with the family as well? Because if one person is suffering mentally, it's pretty much going through the whole household.
Yeah. We have a statement, so goes the leader, so goes whatever they're connected to. And so in this case, so goes the father, so goes the husband, so goes the family. And so we have made a very intentional effort about reaching men, making sure that men understand there's a safe place, which is big, that you can be vulnerable and still be revered as a man.
Yeah, important stuff.
So how does faith, keeping the faith, obviously, how do you win the battle? Is there a finish line?
Yeah, there is. And that finish line begins with hope. When I can see myself walking into a different reality, that this suffering, this struggle, this valley of life will not be my lifelong sentence, that's the beginning of walking in victory. And so when does it end? Well, that's a lifelong journey. We will fight this forever.
Every day.
Every single day, time and time again.
That's why they say your prayers. That's what Mom said every night.
Absolutely. Take that to heart. Pastor, thank you so much for coming in and joining us this morning.